Hello and welcome to the World Soccer Talk podcast, your weekly dose of talking about watching soccer on TV, online and apps. Coming up on episode 59, we discuss why the Miami expansion team will have big implications for Major League Soccer, which MLS club has signed a deal with YouTube TV, more details about the new ESPN Plus streaming service, and our thoughts about the trials and tribulations of VAR from the last week. And of course, we've got the letters from you, the listeners, in our mailbag section. My name is Christopher Harris, aka The Gaffer, and I'm joined today by Kartik Krishnaiyer. Now, for those listeners who are new to this show, we dive in pretty deep into the analysis of the soccer media. So whether it's on television, online or apps, talking often about commentators and production values, and also talking about games that we enjoyed, of course, this past week. And the big talking point, Kartik, is let's start off with VAR. Obviously the Bundesliga, Major League Soccer and Serie A have been trialing it. But with the FA using it for the FA Cup and the League Cup, I don't think that we're ready for prime time. I don't think that we're ready for the Premier League to start this next season. What do you think?
No, I don't think so either. I mean, obviously, that Liverpool-West Brom game was a debacle because of VAR. Look, quite frankly, I don't think the Bundesliga has done a good job with it. I think I've said this on this show previously. There are too many stoppages. There are too many long stoppages. The stoppages don't happen with any rhyme or reason. Usually they get the call, the correction of the call, or confirm the call correctly. Sometimes they haven't in Bundesliga matches. Now, Major League Soccer has taken a much more conservative approach under the direction of Howard Webb, obviously former Premier League official, top Premier League official, to VAR, in that they only review certain things or only have stoppages for certain occasions, which has allowed a lot of questionable calls to stand in Major League Soccer without review. So VAR isn't disrupting MLS matches as much as they're disrupting Bundesliga matches. But then the purpose of VAR, which is to get all these calls right, isn't happening in Major League Soccer. You go to the Liverpool Forest game on Saturday, and
Liverpool West Brom game. Yeah,
Liverpool West Brom match in the FA Cup, and you had all sorts of confusion about calls. Now, the West Brom goal that was disallowed by VAR was probably the correct call, but again, there was a delay. The goal for West Brom, the one goal Jay Rodriguez scored, there was a delayed reaction. He hesitated to celebrate because there was going to be a VAR review. And it's even going to affect how players celebrate and indulge in their goals. It was a debacle at the Confederations Cup. Remember the end of that Mexico-New Zealand game? I think it has not gone well in Germany. Italy, it's been questionable, honestly, how well it's gone. And in Major League Soccer, it went okay. But again, that's under the direction of Howard Webb, who is conscious of having constant stoppages in matches and doesn't want to do that. So there are several questionable calls that took place in MLS matches after VAR was implemented that weren't reviewed. So that's kind of the landscape. And if the Premier League wants to jump into that, it's not like goal line technology. Those who say, well, it's a logical next step. Goal line technology is instantaneous. This is something. And before I finish, let's remember what happened with Martin Atkinson. I believe he was the official for the first leg of Chelsea Arsenal, when I thought that there was, and I was not alone in thinking Victor Moses clearly committed an infraction on Maitland-Niles in the area, and wasn't even reviewed. Mm-hmm. Now, it didn't matter in the long run because Arsenal won the tie anyway. But had Chelsea advanced to the League Cup final, we'd still be talking about that, and VAR not doing its job in that occasion.
Yeah, the two main issues with VAR are still the same ones that have been apparent for several months now. The first of which is the delay. So for a 4-minute delay in that Liverpool West Brom game to determine whether a goal should have been a goal or not is absolutely ridiculous. That is way too long. And the second issue is really kind of the communication. So the Man City game that we watched this past week, we had, which was the FA Cup game, I think it was. Silva had scored a goal against Cardiff, but then there was mass confusion. The commentators didn't know why the goal had been disallowed. There was confusion among the players, among the coaches, among the fans in the stadium. Ultimately, the correct decision was made. And that's the thing. At the end of the day, the VAR does help make correct decisions, but it's happening way too slowly, and there's mass confusion. So I think there is a way to fix this. I think there is a way to speed up the review to make sure that it's still a correct review without rushing it, but also to communicate from the referee to the players and to the coaches and the fans and the commentators and the TV viewers. I think you really have to mic up the referees and have a system so that we're hearing what the referee is saying for incidents when there are VAR, or there is VAR. Because otherwise, we're just trying to guess what the referee is doing, and then looking at the body language, looking at, is he raising, is the linesman or the assistant referee raising his flag or not, and which way is it pointing, is it an offside decision, et cetera, et cetera. It's just, I think, at this point, it's just mass confusion, and I think the Premier League, which they're having a meeting soon to determine whether or not to roll out VAR, I think they should wait. Interestingly, Kartik, I went ahead and posted a poll on Twitter this past week, and there was about 400 people that responded, and the question was, which league or competition has implemented VAR in the most effective way so far? And I wanted to find out what you, the listeners, and Twitter followers said. Interestingly, the Bundesliga came in with 39%. They came in first place. Second place was Major League Soccer with 27%. Third place was the FA for the FA Cup and League Cup with 22%. And then last, Serie A with 12%. But I think even though the Bundesliga one isn't perfect, Kartik, I think the perception of it is that it's being done effectively. And I think a lot of that, to me, is for the TV viewer. The graphics they have on screen, the split screen where you see kind of the, I think it's in Munich or Cologne, wherever the VAR video assistant referee studio is. The perception is that it's being controlled better, but again, it's not perfect either. But Kartik, what do you think? I mean, do you think that this is something that can be resolved, or are we going to kind of go through this where it's going to be just seemingly just a slow and laborious process to figure out how to refine this to get it to a point where it is going to work?
Chris, quite frankly, I think it's at this point non-starter, right? I think he needs to be shelved for the foreseeable future. That's my opinion. Until they can get this right, they made a promise to supporters and to people who are skeptics that they wouldn't have these 2, 3, 4-minute delays. I've seen it in the Bundesliga several times, and now we've seen it in England this year. The delays in MLS were manageable. As I mentioned, Howard Webb, he personally had kind of turned me around on the whole VAR issue when I went to a presentation he gave, and I had a long chat with him afterward. Right when MLS implemented VAR, but it's gone one way in MLS, and I think the right way, but not every call is necessarily corrected versus what's happened elsewhere. But you could argue, because in Major League Soccer they're not correcting everything, they're missing things, that it's a useless tool. I don't know that it's entirely useless. It's a tough one because supporters like to complain. Supporters and people around the game like to constantly complain about officiating. Mm-hmm. At the same time, their tool to correct those mistakes is either A, too laborious and not efficient enough, as we're seeing, or B, doesn't correct all the mistakes.
Right.
So maybe there's something beautiful about football being a sport without the kind of stoppages that all the American invented sports have.
Yeah, that's the big issue for me is that this is disrupting the enjoyment of the game. So whether you're a TV viewer or whether you're a spectator in the stadium, it is disrupting the game because, yes, you celebrate a goal and then all of a sudden, the referee does the VAR symbol and it goes to the VAR. Now, if it's a speedy, within 10 seconds, within 30 seconds tops, decision made on something that they can look at and go, yeah, that's a goal or that isn't a goal, that isn't as bad. But when you have like 2-minute delays, 4-minute delays, it's not destroying, but it is disrupting the enjoyment of the game. And that's the beauty of soccer in many ways. It's a fast flowing game, very few interruptions. And I think soccer really needs to find that balance between, okay, let's figure out what we can use technology for, and also what we shouldn't use technology for, and figure out what that is. And that's the stage that we're in thus far. Of all the VARs I've seen so far, I think the Major League Soccer one actually to me is one of the better ones. It's not perfect by any means, and issues with that too. But in terms of the flow of the game, that one has been better, in my opinion, from what I've seen from these other leagues.
Yeah, I think that this is the big talking point, because also from a television perspective, which we cover on this show, football matches fit in a 2-hour window, unless it's a cup match that might go to extra time, right? They neatly fit into a 2-hour window. Very rarely are there scheduling issues, maybe if there's some sort of delay. Now, here in the U.S., we have all kinds of problems because we play through the summer and there's always lightning delays. But in terms of European football, English and German football in particular, since those are on the major networks in this country, they fit nicely into a 2-hour window. Now, what VAR is doing is threatening to make it just like the American sporting events. The only other sport I watch really closely is college basketball. I've said that a number of times on this show. And college basketball is now unbearable because obviously there's always been an element of overtime. But if the games didn't go to overtime, they used to not go over a 2-hour window. There's a set number of timeouts. There are a set number of TV timeouts. That's it. But now that they're reviewing plays in college basketball, particularly in the last 2 minutes of games, where they have to review everything and even review if a guy was standing on the line for a three-pointer. Some of these college basketball games are going 2 hours and 15 minutes, 2 hours and 30 minutes, bleeding into the next program, which in some cases, we saw it with MLS Cup, is a soccer match. We don't want our sport to be in that position. We already have the critiques from people in and around the United States saying, well, it's more difficult to monetize showing football matches, soccer matches on television because of the lack of stoppages and lack of commercial breaks. They figured out how to do that now, right? Mm. So if you start having soccer matches bleed into the coverage of other sporting events, it creates all kinds of problems. I'll go back to the time when there was a delay at the Stadium of Light. Manchester United was playing Sunderland, and that game was on ESPN. It bled into coverage of a Miami Hurricanes versus Clemson Tigers college football game because there was like a 15-minute delay because there was the lights were out in the stadium, I think, including in the dressing rooms. And you had all of these critics saying, oh, who wants to watch soccer? Why is it on? Why is it taking away the first minute maybe or kickoff of a college football game that was going to last 4 hours? So again, I mean, since we're kind of in our infancy also in getting this sport recognized in the mainstream in the United States, I don't want to be in that position where we're alienating people because things are running over a 2-hour window. VAR can wait. That's my opinion.
Yeah, one last thought on this before we move on, Kartik, and that is maybe maybe soccer needs something from tennis, where each team has 2 calls. So in a match of 90 minutes, they're allowed to, if there's something that they see that they believe is controversial, they can take one of their 2 calls and have the referee look at that. Versus, in the FA Cup match, the Liverpool-West Brom game, it seemed that every single incident, it went down to a VAR. And it disrupts the game. So maybe limiting the number of VARs that you can use in a game and letting the coaches decide when or when not they want to use that, maybe that'll help us with the flow. All right, Kartik, let's move on. So what else have you been watching this past week?
I watched the Bayern-Hoffenheim game Saturday morning. Everyone got excited when Hoffenheim was up 2-0. Some great play from Serge Gnabry, who was on loan at Hoffenheim from Bayern. By the way, in Germany and in most UEFA member countries, you can't write in these provisos that they do in England, where if you face a player, for example, Robbie Muster got into it yesterday. Islam Slimani has been loaned to Newcastle. That's a signing that potentially from Leicester could keep Newcastle in the league. However, they still play Leicester once, and so you already have 14 games left in the season. He's going to miss 3 or 4 games with injury. He's coming off an injury. Then you've got a match against Leicester, which he can't play in, so he's only going to be there for about 9 games. You don't have that restriction in Germany. So Gnabry plays, he draws a penalty, he scores the second goal. So Hoffenheim is up 2-0. What a response from Bayern. They win 5-2. Newport hosted Spurs. Great night for football, great atmosphere in Wales and in your home country. Chris, I hope you caught this because it had an occasion feel at the Newport County ground. Spurs were well off the pace. They were fortunate to get an equalizer late. Got the sense that they're beginning to hit a wall, but then that sense promptly disappeared in the first 15 seconds of the match on Wednesday against Manchester United. We'll get to that in a minute.
That match I did miss, actually, but I listened to it on the radio, listened to it on Talk Sport. I think I was going to one of my kids' AYSO soccer games. But great atmosphere, and then I caught the highlights a little bit later. But it's that was a great FA Cup encounter.
Yeah, and it's great for Newport to get a replay because that's going to be very lucrative for the club financially. Liverpool, West Brom, I think we've gone through that match. It would have been such an enjoyable match if it hadn't been for VAR, but VAR is the talking point from that match. I've spent more time this week watching the ancillary program, the supplemental programs on NBC Sports Gold, Chris, and I have actually watching football, and that's a byproduct of the transfer window. So NBC Sports Gold has been a frustrating piece of additional piece that we've had to purchase, right, this season for so many supporters. But this week, I got so much use out of it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday because of the transfer window. So each day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I watched the 30-minute Premier League news program and the 1 hour and a half Premier League Today program. And if you have NBC Sports Gold, you can flip it on now on your iPad or your Android device or your Roku or whatever you're using to watch NBC Sports Gold and go back and watch this coverage. It may be anticlimactic now, right, because the window is passed, but really good stuff. So I would say I had to go to my office in Miami Monday and Tuesday. Both days I came back and watched 2 hours of Premier League Gold non-match coverage. And then same thing on Wednesday, watching both those things live, actually. And then obviously supplemented that with ESPN FC and NBC's excellent studio coverage on Wednesday as the transfer window passed. But we'll see how the rest of the season goes, Chris, but getting those programs, I have to say, may have changed my opinion of NBC Sports Gold. I'm thinking, maybe it's worthwhile. Maybe I should have done the same thing in August and watched all those programs as the window passed. Although, quite frankly, the end of the August window wasn't quite as dramatic as yesterday. Yesterday, there was a lot of activity for a January window. A lot of big moves.
Yeah, I think with NBC Sports Gold, this is probably myself included, and probably a lot of listeners who have subscribed, is we forget about all of that shoulder programming. I mean, now when I signed up for the service back in August, I probably watched it every day for maybe like a week. I was watching kind of the Premier League news show, which is really good, and the fantasy Premier League show with James Richardson and so on and so forth. But over time, I probably the last time I watched it was probably about 4 or 5 months ago. The shame of it is that NBC Sports has access to a whole ton of other programming from Premier League productions that's even better than what's on there already. But for whatever reasons, they haven't shared that on the NBC Sports Gold. Now, maybe that's something in the future. Maybe if they continue NBC Sports Gold, which they said that they're going to consider it. They're going to review it and decide whether or not to continue it next season. But if they do, there's so much other programming they could add on that would provide even greater value. But that's a good point, Kartik, for those, myself included, and probably many of our listeners who might have forgotten that we do have access to that content. And I mean, it's definitely worth watching whenever anyone gets a chance.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of stumbled upon it because I decided I would go on NBC Sports Gold to see what the midweek coverage was going to be like on there, and particularly the Man City game, and stumbled upon it Monday evening. And then promptly on Tuesday, continuing with the week, promptly on Tuesday, because of meetings and the Beckham thing, which we're going to talk about later, and the situation with NASL and the situation with our NPSL Sunshine Conference here in Florida, which people who are listening might know that we've had 2 NASL teams join our conference in NPSL in the last couple of days. And I'm actually, after we're done recording, I'm running off to a meeting regarding the NPSL and the conference. I had forgotten, quite frankly, about the games that I had been checking on the previous night. Then around 3:30, meeting breaks up. One of the people in the meeting asked me, "Hey, do you know where I can find the Nottingham Forest game?" A British person, and I said, "Oh, wow, okay, that's right. We have Premier League games this weekend. Now, of course, that's a championship game, and I told about ESPN 3, but flipped on Swansea Arsenal and got to watch that debacle from Arsenal in the second half." But I have to say, I loved, and you know, I told you this offline when the managerial change was made at Swansea. I loved the appointment. I felt like he was an energetic, infectious character is how I would describe when he was at Sheffield Wednesday. He was able to will them with his personality and his man management skills to the playoff final in 2016. They were unfortunate, in my opinion, to lose that to Hull. 2017, they were pretty good again, Sheffield Wednesday this is, and lost to Huddersfield on penalty kicks in the playoffs. So he gets sacked after they lose to Wolves in the championship, a match that Sean Champion called, and I watched live, and it was all about Carvalhal and how that was going to play out for him. He gets the Swansea manager's job, and I said to you, what a pity. I rate him pretty highly as a manager, but he's going to be remembered for this failure because Swansea is so far from competitive in the Premier League. Well, guess what? A manager can make that kind of difference.
Yeah.
And then I think personally, Chris, with the reuniting of the Ayew brothers, I think at this point, in my opinion, after that move was made at the deadline from West Ham, Swansea will stay in the Premier League. Knock on wood for you, but that's my opinion now.
It's sure looking that way. I mean, it's one of those things though. I mean, Swansea's bound to hit a bad patch at some point, and when that's going to be, we'll have to wait and see. But I mean, what makes it the most interesting thing for me, Kartik, and I'm sure for a lot of our listeners, is you look at the Premier League now for basically the bottom 10 teams. All of them are going to be staring, looking down, going like, "Oh gosh, you know, Swansea's coming up now. They're second from bottom." There is, a good chance that any of those bottom 10 teams could get relegated. So now it makes the relegation battle, more of a frenzy than it was before, and adds, especially with Manchester City running away with the title, it now puts the relegation battle even more in the spotlight, and it's going to be, I think, a lot of actually the next few weeks, I'm sure there's going to be some more managers getting sacked. I mean, Pellegrino at Southampton, I'm sure is going to get sacked pretty soon if Southampton continue to stay where they are, and there'll be other clubs too looking at their managers going, okay, is this the right person to help us stay up? Huddersfield dropping down, Brighton having a tough time, etc. So yeah, it's been entertaining, and actually, of course, for me personally, I've loved it. I was just surprised at how much lack of a fight there was in this Arsenal team. I was expecting something a lot stronger, but now with some of the transfer deadline signings and movings, comings and goings, maybe actually for a lot of these teams, maybe it'll be some different performances, whether better or worse, in the next couple of weeks.
Look, I don't know I think Chelsea is transfer business is very curious to me with bringing in guys like Ross Barkley lately and kind of targeting the likes of Ashley Barnes and Andy Carroll, but they've gotten Olivier Giroud, which might just keep them in the top four. I don't know what Arsenal is doing. If there's been a quit there, if there's a disconnect, as Robbie Mustoe and Robbie Earle seem to indicate, between Wenger now and the new director of football. Power is being wrestled away. Players are confused. I am also confused myself, because I thought the thing was just falling apart, and then you see Ozil has apparently agreed to extend and stay at Arsenal, which I did not expect. I expected him to walk at the end of the season. So, but there was no fight in that match. There was no fight in the match against Bournemouth a few weeks back. Similar circumstance where they took a lead and then were undone by defensive errors. I think it might have ended up with the same scoreline. So, I'm confused by Arsenal. On Wednesday, it was weird, Chris. What's your thought about Wednesday? Because we had 7 Premier League fixtures, but we also had a transfer deadline, and it was difficult really to focus on the matches, to be honest with you. I mean, the Riyad Mahrez saga for Man City had ended before kickoff, although then there were rumors circulating that Johnny Evans, and Man City was playing West Brom, which made it very awkward, that Johnny Evans was going to be held out of the squad and was going to be transferred to Manchester City by before the deadline, which would have been about an hour after the match. It turned out Evans was injured. City has ended their interest in Evans when they got Laporte, but that rumor started to circulate. And it was just a weird thing. You know, you've got Giroud coming in, being introduced to the crowd at the bridge. You've got Lucas Moura coming in, being announced to the crowd at Wembley. You've got Aubameyang being unveiled by Arsenal, simultaneous or almost simultaneous with the kickoffs of these other games. It was very bizarre. And this is what the Premier League and I think Premier League managers wanted to avoid when they voted to move the August window and close it before the season began. It's really ironic. It's kind of a paradox. After they vote to do that, you see the kind of confusion created in the January window by having all of this go on. And I'll be honest, I watched NBC and NBC Sports Gold probably and ESPN FC, all of that combined for probably 6 or 7 hours on Wednesday. Wow. Really devoted my day to it. There was very little football I watched in that period. It was all this other stuff. So what was your opinion of that? Closing the window on a match day? Well,
closing the window on the match day, I mean, it's just kind of bad luck in terms of the way the schedule is set up, and then the last day of the month ends on a Wednesday. I do think that, especially in the summertime, in that summer transfer window, is that they need to have that over before the season start, because it is mayhem. But for me personally, Kartik, I've really tuned out of this whole transfer deadline day mayhem. I've really kind of, because it used to be maybe a couple of years ago something I'd be watching all day long, up until minute by minute. Okay, looking at all the different social media sources, looking at all the different YouTube channels, listening to radio, having the television on, and being so tuned into that, so that one move would happen, and then then there'd be a domino effect, and now another club would sign another player. But the reality is that, to me at least, is that it's a lot of talk but very little action. So yes, there are deals that come through, but the take I take on it is that I'm just going to sit back and just enjoy the football, watch the games, and then when a deal is done, I'll find out. And even if it's like maybe half an hour after it's done, I'm okay with that, because I'm not, because otherwise it's like ADD. You're just like running around crazy, like it's hard to concentrate. So I've just kind of blocked that off, and then just enjoy the matches, and then if deals are done, I'll find out about them in a nice leisurely pace where I'm not going to get stressed out. All right, Kartik, so in terms of some of the stuff I've been watching this past week, FA Cup matches, a bunch of those, Copa del Rey, so Barcelona against Espanyol with Coutinho's debut. Something I watched this past week, Kartik, for the first time I've watched it in probably 3 or 4 years, and it's just by accident I came across it, was the Keys and Gray show. And usually I don't watch this show because I don't really value Keys at all. I mean, Gray definitely a little bit more, but the segments I watched on the show were actually really well done. There was one on Coventry City. They interviewed one of the Coventry City supporters groups, I guess presidents, I guess, and their current situation with the Ricoh Arena. And that's an interview, or that's a topic that otherwise you wouldn't hear about on U.S. television. You mean ESPN's not going to cover it, neither is NBC or Fox or anyone else, unless it becomes a major story. But that I thought was really interesting. And then they also had an interview with the Yeovil manager about the car crash that almost ended his life and how that changed his perspective. And I thought that was a really great exclusive interview that they did that was in depth. That's something that Fox didn't do, even though I think they did mention it in passing. But yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I haven't show as much recently because I only get BN on Fubo. I mean, I used to DVR the show when I used to pay for BN on my cable system and go back and watch it every week. And there was always Keys and Gray are annoying and have their very dated views of the sport, to say the least. And we know in terms of sexism and things, their history and shilling for Qatar. But there is always a feature or two on that show that are worth watching. Every week I would find, and it was usually about a lower league team. So the Coventry piece is well taken. I mean, I still, it's funny, I was having a conversation with someone the other day around one of these meetings related to NPSL or NASL, et cetera, about Coventry, how the European ban, because of Heysel, may have cost that club. That everything that happened after may have been a result of them missing out on Europe the one time because they were banned. And that would have been their foray into continental football, and it was denied to them. And that was interesting. I've heard that from I think it's Watford supporters or maybe Wimbledon supporters, another group of supporters also in the past, that how the European ban impacted their long-term fortunes. But I digress. Keys and Gray always has something worth watching. So if you have BN on your cable system or your satellite provider and you're able to DVR it, I would recommend doing that. Get past the kind of curmudgeons that those two guys have become in time and focus on some of the content. And did they have John Cross or a reporter on too to maybe discuss?
Well, yeah, I only caught probably maybe about 20 minutes of the show, so it's towards the end. So I'm not sure, but to me, it's probably a good show to record and then fast forward.
Yeah,
there's probably segments where it's like, let's just skip that part. And of course, it's whatever you guys are interested in. But there's enough there, I think, to continue watching. Last but not least, Kartik, I just do want to mention that I thought NBC Sports did a pretty decent job with the transfer deadline day happenings. They had Neil Ashton live from Wembley from the pitch there, Derek Gray hosting, and he seemed to be more comfortable this week with the two Robbies. No late drama as usual, which has been par for the course for a couple of years, but overall quite enjoyable. All right, Kartik, so let's move on to TV streaming news.
Okay, so let's kick off this week talking about Fubo TV, who I just mentioned in the last segment. They've added more local NBC networks to its streaming service, adding 7 more last week to bring their total to 51% of U.S. households. Meanwhile, for over-the-air Fox network, Fubo has access to Fox in 75% of U.S. households.
Okay, Kartik, so according to a World Soccer Talk source, the new streaming service from ESPN called ESPN Plus is currently in production and could be ready for launch by the middle of April or early May. Now, ESPN is actively trying to create original programming that it can stream exclusively on platform. And ESPN, according to my source, is looking at ESPN Plus being the Netflix of sports. Now, in terms of timing, there's a lot of talk about MLS Live being rolled up into ESPN Plus, but with the Major League Soccer season starting in March, yet again, the streaming service is not going to be ready to include that. So, again, growing pains, I think, with MLS Live and ESPN, and we'll have to wait and see how it all rolls out.
There was a much talked about interview this week, Chris, between Grant Wall and Don Gar, which was
on the SI Plan, the football site. The interview made Garber sound very arrogant, very entitled, made MLS sound very entitled, as if they control professional soccer in the United States and everything that's happened that's beneficial is due to them, and that they are responsible for the growth of soccer in the country. Very smug. There's a lot to pick apart and unpack in this interview. The thing that I would stress is that Garber and MLS have been on the defensive, and Sunil Gulati have been on the defensive about Soccer United marketing during this U.S. soccer presidential campaign. It has emerged as the focal point of the campaign, as we saw again with Hope Solo's complaint to the U.S. Olympic Committee the other day, where she went right at it and said, youth soccer, women's soccer, other men's professional leagues, no one's getting a fair shake because of the collusion between, as she's alleged, between U.S. soccer and Major League Soccer and Soccer United marketing. So Garber takes issue with Carlos Cordero, who's a longtime board member who I will tell you over the course of 7 or 8 years has probably been a bigger hindrance to the NASL, going back to when I worked at the league, NASL operating successfully than Garber himself or Sunil Gulati. I would say Cordero and probably Dan Flynn were our biggest enemies in U.S. soccer, speaking from an NASL perspective. But anyway, Cordero is one of the front runners to succeed Gulati. He has now made Soccer United Marketing's contract an issue. Garber says to Wall in this interview that basically Cordero has the last 10 years, every single thing that's been consummated between U.S. soccer and Soccer United marketing, Cordero was involved in. Very defensively, Garber says this. My understanding is a lot of this stuff had been forced on the board of U.S. soccer, had been recommended by Sunil Gulati as the president, or had been arbitrarily done by Sunil Gulati as the president with only token consultation with his board in order to make sure that some MLS relationship continued without RFPs, without any sort of how would I put it, Chris? Any sort of opportunity to engage other potential media partners or marketing partners. So the interview by Garber was very self-serving. I think Grant Wall asked some difficult questions and then failed to follow up on those difficult questions when Garber evaded him with the answers he gave.
Yeah, and that was one of the bones of contention I had about Grant Wall. The way that this interview was set up is that it was a written interview. So it was a written interview with written questions that Grant Wall had, and then he sent it in to Garber, and then Garber replied. And I mentioned that to Grant on Twitter, and I think he said that, yes, there were some follow-up questions. But with the format of the interview being, okay, here's a Word document and here's the questions, and Garber fills out the answers, I'm sure with the help of his PR people to, okay, here's the answers. And then maybe Grant goes back with some written questions. Okay, here's a couple of follow-up questions. Or maybe some of them were, by phone or in person, however they may have been. That format is not conducive to a back and forth interview where you're following up and asking some hard-hitting questions about some of the answers he was given. But it is what it is. But I thought that this interview was really interesting. And so any listeners that didn't get a chance to actually read this, I highly recommend it. It's pretty long. I think he goes through and answers about 27 questions from Grant Wall that goes into a lot of detail about SUM and the way that SUM is set up, Soccer United Marketing, and its involvements and relationship with the U.S. soccer side and also, of course, Major League Soccer. But I thought, the two interesting things to me that I took out of this, Kartik, was one is, now, before the World Cup, if you looked at the United States Soccer Federation and the value of the U.S. men's national team and the value of Major League Soccer in a combined TV deal, you would look at this and go, okay, the ESPNs of the world, the Foxes of the world, the Univisions of the world, the reason that they want to go ahead and acquire the rights to U.S. soccer, U.S. men's national team and Major League Soccer is really, for the most part, the U.S. men's national team, because now this is going back a couple of years, but this is a team that everyone rallies around. It gets massive ratings when they're in the World Cup. Even for friendly tournaments, and everyone loves the United States national team. Times have changed, but the way that the questions are answered by Garber is that MLS and SUM are calling the shots. and here's how much money we're giving to U.S. soccer. Kind of that we're the ones that are making the call, making that decision. And to me, that was reversed. And to me, it was all about what MLS wants and what MLS is like you said, very arrogant. But to me, in this conversation, there's no mention of NASL. There's no thinking about NPSL or USL or the US Open Cup. It's all about Major League Soccer and how, according to Garber, that Major League Soccer is the reason that soccer is so popular in the United States, even though there's so many other factors that have absolutely nothing to do with Major League Soccer.
Right. And this is the same sort of nonsense that you and I sat through on Monday, which and people who were at that event might have seen my face as that event went on. I was sitting next to you, Chris, but so you saw it. Just the absolute level of Schadenfreude and just arrogance these guys have. Look, USL they have a relationship with, but they're not doing as much to promote USL as they could. And there were people in USL and at USL clubs who are getting annoyed with being under, being little brother. So there might be some developments there in the near future. And Garber, I feel like, is completely defensive about the situation with Soccer United marketing, and they got sloppy and they haven't papered all these deals and they haven't done the things that are necessary to be to actually defend their position without resorting to other things about how, soccer is so popular because of this. Look at all the things we've done, all the stadiums we've built. And I would concede, I'm not one of these people who says there's been nothing good that's come from MLS. I think MLS has done some wonderful things for soccer in this country. But like any process, they were part of the process, and their model was part of the process to get us to a certain point. And now we're taking on water. Now things are stagnating. We've hit a point of diminishing returns. One last point I would make about this, Chris, before I move on. Part of the reason Carlos Cordero, my understanding has taken now a stand against the Soccer United marketing deal and wanting to kind of revisit that is because he comes from a financial background. He's a former Goldman Sachs vice president. He is a guy who was promised to the people on the grassroots level, at the youth soccer level, more finances, more money coming into U.S. soccer to promote their programs. What he has determined, or the people around him have determined, is that U.S. soccer is being shortchanged by that TV deal. So that goes back to everything you just said a few minutes ago. And Cordero may be right. He might be wrong. Maybe he becomes president. He opens up, he delinks U.S. soccer from MLS and puts it on the market, and they don't get the kind of money they were expecting. Although I think they probably will get more money out of the deal. That's my opinion. So that's the bone of contention. It all goes back to that television deal that you referenced a few minutes ago.
Yeah, which is why we bring it up too, for the listeners who are probably wondering, like, why are we talking about this topic? It is extremely important for TV viewing in the United States, these deals and how these deals are done. And Hope Solo in that I guess, whatever you call it, she issued kind of a statement saying that complaint. Thank you very much, because it wasn't a lawsuit; it was a complaint to the USOC, saying okay, this money, we need transparency. How much of this money in this TV deal is going to the U.S. women's national team? How much of it is going into NWSL or into some of these other from the women's side of the business? And that's something we don't know because there's no transparency with this. So yeah, it's a huge topic. One last thing to add to this, Kartik, we'll talk about this more a little bit later, but one of the other things that Don Garber said in relation to, I mean, we kind of joked about it, but kind of laughed about it, but is that Don Garber took credit for having the Real Madrid-Barcelona game being sold out in Miami, and he said that was, I mean, Major League Soccer was one of the reasons kind of that happened, and I'm like, oh my goodness. All right, let's move on. So we can't make this up. This is
look, Neymar, Messi, Ronaldo, they're all better known than any player in Major League Soccer in this country. They're better known than Michael Bradley or Tim Howard. I'm sorry. Yeah. It's just...
Oh, gosh. Okay, so let's move on. So the full market value of Premier League Soccer TV and media rights has been predicted to surpass the barrier of £10 billion for the first time, signaling that the allure of the top flight TV hasn't lost its luster in the age of digital streaming. Now that translates to about $15 billion. They're looking at the upcoming Premier League rights in the UK and overseas. Of course, with the US, we've got a deal all the way through till 2020 or 2021. So that one's already done. But collectively, worldwide, they're looking at a record-breaking deal for the Premier League up to about $15 billion. Now, compare that to the $4 billion offer that MP and Silver made to Major League Soccer for the next round of rights. So it just puts it into context in terms of, $4 billion is a massive offer, and that's something that MLS should definitely consider in the future when those TV rights deals come up for renewal.
Yeah, for sure. On that MP and Silva deal, I don't think that book is closed yet, by the way. Moving on, it seemed like yesterday on Twitter and in the U.S. Soccerverse, we were having the same conversations we normally have on the show because LAFC announced a partnership with YouTube TV for local coverage of LAFC games. However, it's only available if you live in the LA market and English language broadcasts only, and it is a premium service. So does the Galaxy's traditional model of being on Fox Sports LA or does the LAFC model of being on YouTube premium, which carries the day? I posed a question to Alexi Lawless actually on Twitter. You may have seen that. And I think Lawless was hedging, but seemed to think, like I seem to think, and I presume you, Chris, as well, that there is a definite direction this stuff is going. And LAFC has probably jumped out ahead of that curve. And the controversy about this yesterday, 3-4 years from now, we'll look back and think, that was pretty smart of them.
Yeah, and also getting YouTube TV on their shirts as a shirt sponsorship deal as part of this. It's great. Yeah. It's great news for YouTube TV. I mean, it's a great way to get their name out there and to have people that aren't familiar with the service consider it. Of course, if you live in the LA market, that's fantastic. If you live outside the LA market, not so much. I'm guessing that it'll be similar to the MLS Live deal or the ESPN Plus deal, where you'd still be able to access these broadcasts with those paid services.
I have to ask a question, which is for Direct Kick on Direct TV, which I used to get for MLS. I might subscribe this year. It kind of depends year to year whether I subscribe. What happens with these games, which are obviously being broadcast on a non-television platform? How do they because what would happen with Direct Kick is, Chris, they would just turn on the Fox or Comcast Sports, regional sports net that's covering. They would just flip that channel on, right, for the 2 hours of the MLS game. Yep. So I wonder how this impacts that, because there's no channel to flip on the DirecTV program guide. There's no YouTube TV. Yep. So maybe LAFC is off that package, which devalues that package, presumably.
Yeah, hopefully Major League Soccer's thought about this, and hopefully they can take the stream and then put that through and have that available through that package. But we'll have to wait and see. The news just broke yesterday, but it's still exciting news. And I wouldn't be surprised, too, if we see some copycats and maybe DirecTV Now or Sling TV try to do something similar in other markets. But it's a good idea. Moving on, BBC Sports has retained the rights to show Premier League highlights for a further 3 years. That's through 2022 in the UK. That means Match of the Day will continue with Gary Lineker hosting, and one of the most popular highlight shows in the world, really. It's been around since the 50s or 60s, and continues to be a staple of UK television.
I talked to somebody this week about this in the industry who told me Match of the Day has been impacted by the ability to get snap highlights from the 3 p.m. UK kickoffs on various web services legally in the UK. So we're so used to getting things instantly in the US, right? And even when I've traveled to India, you get things instantly. And I was transported back to reality the times I've been in the UK on a match day. But an industry source this week told me upon the signing of this deal hey, match of the day is not what it used to be, because people would tune into match of the day not necessarily for the analysis of the pundits, but because it was the only place they could see clips from these matches. Now that's not the case anymore. So watch this space. Let's see if the value of the bumper rights, which is what the BBC's now had for some time, goes down after this 3-year cycle.
All right, and then one more news story before we move on to the next segment, Kartik.
Yeah, Seb Salazar and Herc Gomez, two of our favorites here at World Soccer Talk, going to the FIFA World Cup in Russia to cover the Mexican national team, El Tri in English. So that should be good coverage. And Chris, this is what I think you and I have been talking about for months or maybe years now. ESPN can still provide the newsy side of the World Cup, even though they don't have the rights. And I know with Salazar and Gomez there, I'll probably watch their coverage pre and post game rather than Fox's.
Yeah, this is huge, Kartik, really. I think you wrote a story maybe a month ago, 2 months ago, that ESPN could be a place to go for World Cup analysis rather than Fox. And we saw that from the FIFA World Cup draw, is that the live FIFA World Cup draw had on Fox about 61,000 viewers. The post-draw analysis had 120,000 people watching it on ESPN. So people look at ESPN as really kind of a thoughtful and a place for analysis with some great talent. And for ESPN to send Seb Salazar and Hercules Gomez to Russia to cover Mexico in English, that's huge. And I think that's Salazar and Gomez to me are probably two of the most interesting and informative people to cover El Tri. And you look at the Fox crew and go, okay, there's Mariana Trujillo. I'm sorry for the mispronunciation, but also who else is there? Fernando Fiore.
Trujillo is there. You've got Francisco X Rivera. I think Mariano Trujillo is decent. I think he's given some good analysis, but the comfort level we have with Salazar and Herc, and I think most people look when I talk, I thought, and maybe we were ahead of the curve with these two guys, but when I talk to people in the game now, they tell me how good they think Hercules Gomez is, how unafraid he is, and how he's breaking some important stories and giving some key analysis, and everybody just raves about Seb Salazar. It went from back in May or June of last year telling people, hey, you should watch this guy, you should keep an eye on this guy, to everybody now saying, yeah, Salazar is one of the best guys we've got in the business in the U.S. So ESPN, huge advantage, in my opinion. You could say it's a theory, but again, I go back to the draw, to the day of the draw, and the rating for the ESPN FC special that aired on ESPN2 versus Fox's post-draw coverage. And there were more people watching ESPN.
Yeah, that's going to be one to watch for sure. And it'll also be interesting to see what Fox does, who they're sending out to cover the Mexican national team. We still don't know. All right, moving on to TV ratings. We've got a few numbers that have come in. We've got it was FA Cup weekend, so the numbers for the FA Cup matches usually aren't as big as Premier League. Actually, nowhere near. The big one would be U.S. men's national team in the friendly against Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's a match that I didn't watch. I wasn't that interested in it, to be honest with you. Yeah, I think a lot of us, a lot of viewers and probably a lot of listeners were in the same situation. But 331,000 viewers on FS1 on Sunday for a 9:30 to 11:30 Eastern kickoff.
I'm actually surprised it was that high, and it was an FS1 game, not an ESPN game. So that's a decent number. It shows even in this time of being in the worst place in almost 3 decades, the U.S. men's national team can still draw viewers for random games with a B team at a terrible time. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm surprised by the number. I expected about 100,000, honestly.
Yeah, and in some ways too. I mean, I think for the U.S. men's national team now, it's almost like a scouting trip in terms of watching some of this younger talents coming through and seeing some up-and-coming stars. But yeah, oh well. I don't think I missed much. I heard it was a pretty boring game. Listener mailbag this week. We've got a few messages. This first one is from Rob Keith, and he sent in this email. He says, a few weeks ago, I contacted you on Twitter and asked about Eredivisie rights for the Dutch league in the US, and you mentioned that Oz.com may have acquired the rights. So I decided to check it out. I wanted to give you an update on the site. I signed up using their offer of a free 30-day trial. But to date, they haven't put any new fixtures on the site. The only matches available are replays from December. I checked around kickoff time on January 21st, and not a single stream was made available, including the biggest game of the weekend, which was Ajax against Feyenoord. The site appears to own the rights to the Scottish Premiership and the Belgian League as well, but it isn't available in the US. The website interface is also extremely confusing. In short, the website isn't worth it. I cancelled my free trial, but still have access for the entire month, so I'm going to continue to check it out and see if there are any matches available. Hopefully they get it together. I'm not optimistic based on this experience. I appreciate the work that you guys put in, and I look forward to your podcast every week. Well, thanks, Rob, for the update. This is really helpful because I've reached out to Oz.com a couple of times, no response, and I'm trying to figure out whether or not the site is even legal or not. Also, I did some research, and the website is based in Iceland, or the company's based in Iceland. So again, I don't know if it's just a pirated site or what, but I guess we still don't know. But if any other listeners are listening that have some intel on this, please let us know. Now, the next one is an email that came in from Julio, and he said, the latest episode of the podcast characterized the Guardian's investigation of the Phil Neville appointment for England's national team, women's team, as a crusade and ridiculous. I was extremely disappointed in this. The Guardian is doing due diligence in asking legitimate questions about Phil's managerial qualifications and background that the Fleet Street media would be asking of men appointed to lead the men's national team. The dismissal of the critics and most of the media's lack of security of Phil gives me the impression of an old boys club mentality, since many people in the media know and like Phil. Given the FA's bungling of the Inolia Aluko, Mark Sampson affair, given the FA the benefit of the doubt is naive to say the least. I'm really disappointed in the World Soccer Talk podcast just giving Phil a pass. And that's really kind of pointed at me, Kartik. I was the one that said that the Guardian went on a crusade. I'm looking at this as... I'm not looking at the background, but I'm looking at this as just strictly a managerial appointment, and looking at a manager that has experience as an assistant manager and has been appointed, and yes, there's a lot of baggage that goes with that, and there's a lot of in terms of making sure you're interviewing the right candidates, and there's a process that the FA didn't follow. My issue was more about the crusades from the Guardian, or apparent crusade from the Guardian, where they just kept on going on and on and on about this. And now, Kartik, I did a little bit of research after I got this email, but any guesses how many articles the Guardian published in their investigation about this Phil Neville incident?
Well, it was at least 6, because I read at least 6 articles about it. So I think it was, I'd say a dozen.
It was 12. It was 12 articles. Yeah. And that's the thing, though, too. It seemed that they really hooked into this topic more so than others. And to me, it went overboard.
Look, I want to speak out on this, because I am a person of a leftist political persuasion. I've been involved in feminist causes. I've been involved in these sorts of things through the years. But to me, there is an overkill constantly now on the Guardian football pages about issues of sexism in football, issues of racism in football, issues of homophobia in football, issues of these sorts of kind of identity leftist issues that does a disservice, because, you know, the one or two really good Marina High columns or whoever is good, that makes the point. You don't have to have this constant drumbeat of all of these Guardian writers piling on to the point where you then get sympathetic for the subject. In this case, Phil Neville, and in previous cases, guys like Dave Whelan, etc. Right? So, or Malky Mackay, etc. I mean, I don't know. I think that they have an agenda to promote kind of an identity and a political ideology that knows no end within football, and that does a disservice to the causes that they're promoting, because they are the extremists that then the other side, the side that we're trying to get to change their attitudes and their ways and their cultural views of their dated cultural views of how things should be done in a modern society, then dig in. So, yeah, I this is not the first time this has happened. I mentioned the Malky Mackay thing, Dave Whelan. I'm sure if you gave me 5 minutes, I could come up with another half dozen examples of the Guardian and Observer doing this.
Yeah, I just thought it was overkill. Moving on, actually, this comes from one of the articles you wrote this past week, Kartik, about the FA Cup rights in the United States, and I highly recommend it too for listeners. It's on the homepage of worldsoccertalk.com. It goes into more detail in regards to the FA Cup rights for next season moving forward, and the likelihoods that it could be going to a streaming-only platform. And it discusses many of the streaming providers that could be interested or actually that we know are interested. This comes from Weird Beer Guy, and he sent in this tweet. He says, streaming will be the downfall of sports in the United States. Too many issues with crappy servers and bandwidth to make all matches streaming. All of your streaming services still need work, and I have great internet speeds. Most of these matches come on and in the morning, where most of the sports networks are showing reruns or re-airs of Talking Heads. Live matches, regardless of who is playing, are better than any reruns or Talking Heads. That I agree with. But the movements, the industry, with the way that everything is moving, it's moving to streaming. Everything's streaming except for your big massive events like the World Cup. Even Champions League is moving to streaming. So except for isolated games, but that's the way that everything is moving towards. And then one more, Patrick Crakes sent in this tweet. He says, the FA Cup in the US is a tough sell for most networks. Little value from distribution and ad sales, plus challenging periods of time. Toss in small unknown teams and no Premier League clubs until the later rounds, and there's not much to leverage. Streaming makes sense as the FA could get the rights fee, although at a cost of reach. And that goes into, Kartik, what we've been discussing quite a bit, especially in your article, that it's a challenge. It is one of those challenges where the rights fees are going up, but then it's getting harder and harder to actually, the actual number of TV subscribers are going down. And I think that's why a lot of this is moving to streaming, where a lot of companies are looking at, they can actually probably make just as much money, or that's probably the best way to make money, than put it on TV and getting very little in ad sales. Now, listeners, if you do have any questions for us or any feedback, or you want us to read out anything on air, send it to web@worldsoccertalk.com. You can tweet us at worldsoccertalk, or hit us up on Facebook at facebook.com/worldsoccertalk. Now, Kartik, let's move on to our featured topic of the week. For listeners, this past Monday, Major League Soccer announced that it has added Miami as an expansion team. Both Kartik and I were at the media event, and I was there for the press conferences afterwards, and did some interviews with Don Garber, David Beckham, Marcelo Clare, and many others. And I wanted to get your thoughts, Kartik, first, and my thoughts too about this Miami MLS event, and also talk about some of the things that we learned afterwards, which have a big impact and a big factor on TV deals, etc. So first of all, let me kick off by saying that this event was about an hour. I think it was an hour and 5 minutes, and it was like a pep rally. It was loud. It was a lot of nothing. It was about 1 hour presentation that could have been distilled down to about 2 minutes of actual news. Of course, the Don Garber and others, and David Beckham, of course, introduced the new investors for Miami MLS, and they went into their stories, and when it talked about how great the city of Miami is, etc. And for those people that have already seen the media event, I won't go into any more details than that. But the most important things that came out of this is that There was not one word about the stadium, not one word in that entire 1 hour and 5 minute media event, or whatever type of event you want to call it. It was a mixture of media plus local celebs plus fans. Also, there was no confirmation that the team had actually been added to Major League Soccer, and this was the big mistake, was that there was Major League Soccer, welcome to Miami, welcome to MLS, but no confirmation. This was the same type of thing we had heard 4 years ago in a similar press conference that had been held in downtown Miami, but no confirmation, no clarification that actually Major League Soccer had added Miami as a team. We didn't find that out until afterwards to get clarification that yes. Now, this is us in isolation, only being at this event and not seeing articles or press releases or anything else. We were just listening to the words. And then one more thing too, Kartik, is that there was no mention for this in the entire 1 hour event when the team would actually launch. And for anyone that went to this event and walked away from it and didn't go to any of the press conferences afterwards, they would have missed so much information. And the best example I have of this, Kartik, is that Ray Hudson was there from beIN Sports. And on Monday night on the Extra, they were talking, there was one of the lead stories talking about Miami finally gets an MLS team. And Ray Hudson was talking about, we don't know when this team is going to launch. We don't know the team name. We don't know the team colors. And yes, the team name and team colors we didn't know. But when the team is launching, we did find out, but post event, we found out in the press conferences afterwards. But Ray Hudson had gone to the event, and once it was done, he was gone. I mean, back to his home or back to the studio. So from a informational basis, this was, I wouldn't say a disaster, but it was embarrassing, I thought, Kartik.
Yeah, there was no substance to it at all. It was a pep rally. It, again, was geared towards the assumed naivety of soccer fans in this country and soccer media in this country. So I think that maybe take a step back to some of the earlier discussions we had, and something I did not interject in there when we talked about Garber having a very dated view, a 2-decade-old view of soccer in this country or the soccer landscape. There is an assumption among MLS executives that they have a canvas and it's a blank canvas and they can paint the canvas about soccer in any way they want, and the consumer, being the fans here in South Florida or the media covering this event, will eat it up any way that they paint it. And that's not the case anymore. That was more so the case in 2008, the last time they tried to put a team in Miami. And I sat at a press conference in Marcelo Clare's office and heard some of this same stuff. And then in 2014, when you and Josh Tomlinson covered that event for us at World Soccer Talk, I was up in Tallahassee that week, but it was very much the same thing. The problem is now people who cover the sport and watch the sport are more sophisticated. So, I thought there was a lot of hype. Okay, we finally found out after the fact, after the press event, that Miami had in fact been admitted as a new MLS quote franchise, since that's what they are at MLS. We heard the term franchise over and over again, which just offends me because these are supposed to be clubs, right? Mm-hmm. But it was a lot of glitz and glamour. But look, I think if you assess this, Chris, this team, we can't have the metric of what happened in Portland or Orlando or Kansas City or any of these other markets and compare it to Miami, because I don't think attracting fans and creating a supporters culture or being accessible to the community is really their top priority with this club. I think this is about TV contracts, as Garber admitted to you after the press conference. In the one-on-one sessions and in the mixed zone. This is about the outside perception of MLS to people in Europe and South America. This is about sponsorship deals. So we can say, look, they only had 30 or 35 supporters in the Southern Region at this thing. It wasn't like in Orlando where 1,000 people showed up at the airport to greet Kaká when he came to town, and hundreds of people came to greet Dom Dwyer, of all people, when he came to town. It's not like that. It's not like Kansas City. It's not like Portland. There is a different metric. Will this team be successful in engaging the South Florida community? I'm not sure it will be, which is the metric everybody uses to push back on this team. But I come to the conclusion from talking to people around MLS also, that really doesn't matter. If the stadium is half empty, it's not going to matter that much. Okay, this is about other things. It remains to be seen if those other things outweigh the potential roadblocks and trouble they have in generating supporters.
Yeah, that's a good point, Kartik, because I did ask Beckham, Garber, briefly, just kind of a one-on-one, is that how much of a factor is Miami-Fort Lauderdale being one of the largest TV markets in the United States without a Major League Soccer team? How much of that is an impact adding Miami as a team, as a franchise? And he said it's very important. He said that especially with the new TV deal coming up, and the new TV deal, which is going to be 2022, I believe it is, the negotiations for that will start in 2021.
Let me point out something real quickly on this. Okay, we think in terms of English language a lot. Miami-Fort Lauderdale is the third largest Hispanic household television market in the country, only behind New York and Los Angeles. Or Los Angeles is one, New York is two. And that Univision deal, where the numbers have been, we've tracked the numbers on that. They're okay, but they're nowhere near Liga MX's numbers for Univision. I think that has a big, Miami is a big part of trying to make sure Univision re-ups with Soccer United Marketing and MLS.
Yeah, big time, especially kind of bilinguals, or imagine if there was a Miami team. I mean, there's going to be one, but imagine that rolls out and you have a couple of stars on the team. I mean, those ratings, not just even Miami and Fort Lauderdale, but you look at Hispanic areas of the United States would definitely get a huge bump in, especially on Univision. And also on Fox and also on ESPN. But that's the thing though too, is that the deal, the negotiations for the new TV deal will start about 2021. This team in Miami will launch in 2020. So the timing really, to me, this is, like you said, Kartik, this is more about the business side. You have to be in the Miami market. Now, if you're a Heineken and you've got this international ad campaign, and you go to the US and say, okay, Major League Soccer, we want to go ahead and get this new campaign into the homes across the United States. And Major League Soccer says, well, actually, Miami-Fort Lauderdale, we don't have a team there, and we're working on it. And that's a massive market, especially for a Spanish-speaking audience that you're not in. And now they're in, which is great news. At the end of the day, Kartik, I'm glad that this team is joining Major League Soccer. From a local level, from a personal level, I'd love to have a team to go and support. I just think in terms of how this event was focused, it was, so much hype. There was so much hype in this thing. It was like 98% hype, 2% of actually real details. And the real details, that's the part that worries me the most, is that they don't have a stadium locked down. And even if they get the stadium locked down, then there's the issue of making this a success. And like you said too, Kartik, even if it's half-empty stadiums, it's still going to be effective for Major League Soccer on a business point of view, on a business level. And of course, on a club level, they're going to be worried about the perception of having half-filled stadiums. But it is what it is. It's Miami. It's a very fickle sports market. So I think it's a slam dunk for Major League Soccer. It's a huge task for Miami to make this work. We'll have to wait and see what happens. The other thing about this, Kartik, too, I must add, is the timing of this announcement was quite peculiar. And that was a question that I had for Major League Soccer. I went ahead and requested comment. I didn't hear back from them. But I asked them, why rush this decision? Why make this announcement now? Why not wait until July once you have the court ruling that comes out to determine whether the final piece of land that Miami needs to build a stadium has been approved or not? And no response. But any thoughts from your side in terms of why announce this now at this stage?
Yeah, Columbus, the U.S. soccer election, political pressure on the city of or local pressure with the Moss brothers on those who are trying to create a problem in the court system for Beckham's group or now the Moss group to acquire those final parcels of land to build the stadium. So I think the timing was strategic. I don't think it was because the deal just got done. I think there was three factors. MLS is having a really difficult time redirecting the conversation away from Columbus. I think this certainly might have helped for a few days, but long term probably doesn't. Look, if Columbus does ultimately move, they're never going to be able to get past that, right? And a lot of people are not going to look at the league this way ever again. Well, it doesn't matter how many announcements like this they have.
Yeah, well, that's the thing though too about Columbus is that this decision in Miami does put that in context, because I'm sure what's going to happen is that Miami's been awarded a team. Okay, now the move to go ahead and move the team in Columbus to Austin is likely going to happen, although there's still chances it could change, but it's likely going to happen. And then the next shoe that drops then is that Cincinnati will likely be awarded the next team in that area, so that kind of replaces the Columbus. And it's all orchestrated. It's all part of a plan. It's all from a business perspective on what's best for Major League Soccer and for their owners. And the Miami is just an important part. That's kind of the first thing that needs to happen for these other things to happen right afterwards. So, yeah, so stay tuned. I'm sure over the next coming months, there's going to be more announcements and more big deals. But this one seemed to be rushed. And that's the thing, too. I mean, one more thing on this, Kartik, is that Major League Soccer all along, Don Garber, too, in his State of the League address in 2014, said he was not going to confirm Miami as a team until the stadium was finalized. The stadium is not finalized. So Correct. They went against their words. It's a risky proposition, because if the Overtown thing falls through, which is unlikely, it should pass. But if that fell through, then it's back to the drawing board. It's like, okay, now where do you go? I mean, there's not a lot of space available, and real estate value is extremely high. We're back to the drawing board. We're back to where we were 4 years ago, where we're just trying to find a location. And it may happen, but it could be that Miami FC or Miami MLS team, whatever it's going to be called, is going to be playing in temporary stadiums for not just 2020, but 2021, 2022, who knows how long. And I think in some ways that Major League Soccer is okay with that for the short term. Obviously not for the long term, but short term, because that's going to help them out on the TV side.
Let me explain an intervening event that happened also in the state of Florida in 2013 when Mark Abbott came to Orlando and got the deal signed off on by local officials. Orlando City was supposed to have county and municipal support for the building of their stadium. They broke ground at a ceremony I was at in 2014 on a plot of land where the stadium wasn't eventually built. Okay. Right. And they ended up playing 2 years at the Citrus Bowl when they were only supposed to play a half a season at the Citrus Bowl. I think MLS now realizes, okay, if they hold Miami to this standard, they really didn't hold Orlando to it, because Orlando had a plan, and then the plan completely fell by the wayside. The majority owner of Orlando FC, Orlando City SC, had to Flavio da Silva ended up having to self-fund that stadium. So, and on a different plot of land, yes, it's in the same neighborhood, but it was not the same place they broke ground and the same place they were supposed to put the stadium. I think that maybe they backed off that because of what happened in Orlando, or they backed off on it very cynically, we could say, because they need to redirect the message from the debacle that is Columbus, which is a debacle for them of epic proportions and of their own making.
Yeah, it's a PR nightmare. And don't get me wrong, too. I am extremely happy that MLS is coming to Miami. I just have concerns. I have just concerns about the stadium, and not just even stadium, just in terms of transportation, parking, just the accessibility of making this a success. Now, that's issues that the club and Major League Soccer are going to have to figure out themselves. But as somebody who's passionate about the sport and wants to see it succeed, I want to make sure that they're making the right decisions and making sure that this is going to be a long-term success. right, Kartik, let's move on and close this show out. So where can listeners find you on the internet if they want to catch up on your latest interviews and articles, etc.?
KKFLA737 on Twitter, and here at worldsoccertalk.com and other places on the net. Just Google me.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. You can get a new episode of the World Soccer Talk podcast every Thursday. Every episode is released on SoundCloud, YouTube, Stitcher, iTunes, TuneIn, Audio Boom, and worldsoccertalk.com. If you like the show, share it with your friends on social media and give us a review on iTunes. And Kartik, what should they do?
Enjoy your football.